Welcome to Crescent City Crime, dear listeners. I'm Tracy,
And I'm Brian.
and it's so wonderful to be back after our little hiatus.
Yes, it's good to be back. Good to be uh, moved into our new place.
Moved into our new place. It was a lot.
Yes, quite a bit of work. Getting new place ready and getting stuff out of the old place, cleaning up the old place, moving my ballistic shield from covering the front room window and the wall surrounding it to covering the bedroom window
It's your security
that
blanket.
that faces the street.
It's your security blanket.
Well, yeah, don't need it as much in this neighborhood as we did the previous neighborhood.
Yes, unfortunately, the neighborhood we moved out of was getting pretty rough.
Yeah, a, a shootout between two vehicles on the end on Bank Street. Yeah, Bank Street, Norman C. Francis, which is only a block over from us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
that's
that
9 years there, and something like that goes down. Not to mention, there were two more shootings within a block of us that week.
yes, and we've managed to move into a more residential, quieter neighborhood. It's kind of strange to me how quiet a neighborhood in New Orleans could be at night.
Yes, consider we were living on a main thoroughfare.
For a long time.
Yeah, for about 9 years, and it was very nice 9 years ago.
I would say that when we were starting to come out of the pandemic is when it was getting hairy.
Yeah, when a very shady element started hanging out around the convenience store down the block, and then it spilled over to the exterior of the very nice D-Max Bar and Grill. Nighttime. Uh, nothing's more. You know, nothing's more fun than listening to uh, some character on a street corner boast about how much of a badass he is and about how nobody better mess with him, all that stuff. And you're walking past him thinking, yeah, I don't care. And why would I mess with you? Whatever.
Yeah. But what I think I like best though is that the lack of traffic noises.
And the lack of pedestrian traffic too on this street as well.
Yes. So we are in a better situation and we are pretty happy with our situation too.
Yes, we are.
So there's that our little state of life update for all of y'all because it has been a very busy month and I am really, really happy to be back podcasting again.
Me too.
Yes. And of course, dear listeners, thank you so much for supporting us, for listening to us, for spreading the word about us. Now that things have settled down somewhat, we're going to expand more into this podcast, have some things planned. I had initially wanted to roll these things out last month, but well, life happened. So things have been delayed a bit, but look forward to more announcements in the future.
Yes, we look forward to it. It's always been fun, and it's going to be a lot more fun.
Yes. All of our social media accounts will be in the show notes. So make sure that you follow us on all of the social medias. And of course, please tell your friends and
Tell your enemies, especially your enemies.
ratings and reviews are always appreciated. And be sure to subscribe to us on your preferred podcasting platform. And Brian, it is February, which means it is Black History Month.
It also means it's Mardi Gras.
It also means it is Mardi Gras. But the idea for this episode really, the credit goes to you because last year you had mentioned something about a group called the Deacons of Defense.
Yes, World War II and Korean War era African American veterans who decided they weren't going to take anything from the Ku Klux Klan.
Yes. And today, in honor of Black History Month, we are going to talk about the Deacons of Defense.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So, on July the 10th, 1964, a group of African American men in Jonesboro, Louisiana, led by Ernest Chilly Willie Thomas and Frederick Douglass Kirkpatrick, founded the group known as the Deacons for Defense and Justice to protect members of the Congress of Racial Equality, also known as CORE, against the Ku Klux Klan violence. Most of the deacons were, as Brian mentioned, veterans of World War II and the Korean War. They were one of the first visible self defense forces in the South, and they represented a new face of the civil rights movement, which was, at that time, a brand new thing. This concept of civil rights for all.
Which, of course, shouldn't have been such a new thing, as enlightened members of several generations, even before then, were well aware of the fact that these, are human beings and that all human beings should be treated with respect.
Exactly. The Deacons provided security for the 1966 March Against Fear from Memphis, Tennessee to Jackson, Mississippi. That is through Alabama.
Yes. Yeah.
That is a long march in the deep South, in going into cities and towns where Klansmen were aplenty.
Yeah, and members of a silent majority who supported them.
The presence of the Deacons in southeastern Louisiana meant that the Klan would no longer be able to intimidate and terrorize local African Americans without challenge. The strategy and methods that the Deacons employed attracted the attention and concern of the FBI, which authorized an investigation into the group's activities. The investigation stalled, however, when more influential Black Power organizations, such as the Black Panther Party, emerged after the 1965 Watts riots. With public attention and the attention of the FBI focused elsewhere, the Deacons lost most of their notoriety and slowly declined in influence. And by 1968, they were all but extinct. There is a 2003 documentary called the Deacons for Defense documentary. But today's story is going to detail how one member of the Deacons was able to do the unthinkable in the South: shoot a white man and not face repercussions. Do you know the story, Brian?
No, I don't know this story.
Okay. Ooh, okay. That's exciting then, because I came across this story when I was just looking up Deacons of Defense. So, Henry Austin, a 21-year-old insurance bill collector for an African American agency, sped down a Washington Parish dirt road during the early spring of 1965. After he finished his rounds and the sun began to set, he headed east outside Franklinton to Bogalusa. Glancing at the rearview mirror, Austin realized that a group of white men were following him. The men shot at his car and left holes in the driver's door. So the driver's door.
And that's illegal, by the way, even for police, or even if you're, uh, say, you're pursuing a dangerous felon. It's illegal to shoot from a car at a car.
Ah, okay. A couple of times they almost caught me, he said, and I stopped thinking of it as a joke. They really wanted to kill me. The next night, he set a trap. Following his usual route, he crossed a wooden bridge, turned down a dirt road, and pulled into a pasture behind a line of trees. There, he positioned himself out of sight under the bridge, and after he turned off his headlights, he took out a sawed-off double-barrel shotgun, shells loaded with glass and cardboard. and he waited for his pursuers to reach him. When their lights approached, he opened fire and surprised the driver. The vehicle swerved, missed a bridge, and went into the water and cleared an escape path for Henry Austin. The next day, Austin went to see Charles Sims, the local head of the Deacons for Defense and Justice. He told Sims, "I can't collect insurance anymore. They're out to kill me, and I want to join the Deacons." So Henry Austin was one of the youngest members of the group.
How old was he?
He was 21.
Wow.
Young man.
Yeah, around military age.
Before he began his journey as a deacon, the second unit of the self-defense group was formed during a meeting in Bogalusa on the evening of February the 21st, 1965. There, Ernest Chili Willie Thomas, the vice president of the Deacons' first chapter in Jonesboro, outlined the goals of this new organization that focused on protecting black communities from marauding Klansmen and defending civil rights workers. And the civil rights workers, white or black. The Deacons were out to protect everybody who was interested in expanding voting rights and other civil rights.
Now, given that the majority of the members of the Deacons were veterans, it's understandable to me as a veteran how they can, rise to the cause, because they were accustomed to putting themselves in danger for the protection and the benefit of others.
That's very true.
When you're confronted with that, it's kind of like a magnetism. It's like you just can't walk away from it.
That's a very good insight. So, one of the jobs that the Deacons would do is that they would defend CORE, and they were armed and prepared to meet violence with violence if provoked, while CORE followed the nonviolent approach of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So there's a difference between these two groups. They both wanted the same thing, but their methods differed. And the group that did not believe in violence enlisted the group that did not mind engaging in violence.
Yeah, that different people have different roles in society. And the relationship between King's organization and the Deacons is a microcosm of American society in actuality. The people who, do peaceably do their jobs, do their thing, and, uphold the country, keep the country running. And the fighters who protect them.
Exactly. The Deacons of Defense copied a method that the Klan used: roving armed patrols. The patrols communicated via radio and walkie-talkies. The group also guarded crowds participating in civil rights demonstrations and community events. If a black person was being arrested by a police officer or harassed by Klan members, the Deacons would come to the aid of that person. Thomas said that if the Ku Klux Klan and white people generally wanted violence, they intended to combat violence with violence. The Deacons sought to instill the same fear in Klansmen that black people had felt for decades.
That's only right. And essentially, the Klan has always been a bunch of bullies.
Mm-hmm.
And,
and cowards.
Starting in elementary school, I just hated to hear the words, "Oh, violence is not the answer." Well, maybe violence isn't the answer, but when you're confronted with violence, nothing is going to resolve the situation except violence. Violence does have to be met with violence. You worry about the long-term solution later. But when you're in the proverbial crap, nothing's going to get you out of it like violence will.
So, in other words, you're saying that violence can be a tool when used effectively.
Yes, when you're confronted with violence, the only way out is violence.
And I also want to point out that these were groups of people. Okay, this was not, one person being a bully against a group of people. This was a mass amount of people on both sides.
Yeah, they prefer to, bullies always prefer to outnumber you
That's true too.
because they are, of course, they're a bunch of cowards.
Henry Austin quit his insurance job and volunteered with the Deacons full time. Since demonstrations were held almost every day in Bogalusa, his duties were many and his role was defined day by day. Even though the Civil Rights Act of 1964 had passed and was supposed to end segregation, those empowered to enforce the law simply would not. It's similar to what we talked about in our desegregation of schools episode.
Yeah, whenever certain laws get passed, the public officials or citizens who these laws were passed to counteract are always going to look to find a way around these new laws. They're not just going to roll over and say, oh, well, we're finished. It's illegal now. We can't do it anymore. Just like the two, let's say, two armed robbers approach a bank and they see a sign that says, firearm free zone, no guns allowed. They're just going to look at the sign and say, God darn it, we can't bring our guns to the bank. We got to call this off. you know, Unfortunately, when these laws change to encourage, good cultural changes in our societies opposed to bad, what typically needs to happen as far as the old guard goes is for true change to happen culturally in society, the old guard has to die.
Right.
Because they'll go to their graves trying to find ways to circumvent, new federal, state, or local laws.
The cruelty is the point.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And they'll take it to their graves, and in a way, they should be pitied because they'll go to their graves just as ignorant as they were in the prime of their adulthood. Without the benefit of wisdom.
The Deacons challenged segregation in the workplace around town. One member, Fletcher Anderson, worked at the box factory within the Crown Zellerbach paper mill, which was the largest employer in Bogalusa, and it was infected with racism as scores of Klansmen worked there. Every aspect of the workplace was segregated, including the bathrooms, water fountains, and pay lines. And black employees were barred from holding managerial positions at the mill. That sounds really rough.
Yeah. Sounds like a place I wouldn't want to work at.
No, I wouldn't want to work there either. Washington Parish Sheriff Dorman Crow appointed the first black deputies to serve Washington Parish in June of 1965. Their names are O'Neill Moore and Creed Rogers. The two deputies were partners, and while they were patrolling the small town of Vornado, Klan members attacked them. The Klansmen opened fire from the bed of a black pickup truck while passing the deputies in their patrol car. O'Neill Moore, who was driving, was shot in the head and killed instantly, and the patrol car veered off the road and crashed into a tree. Creed Rogers was hit by a rifle shot to his left shoulder and blinded in the right eye when his head smashed into the windshield.
Mm. And it just goes to show you that the Klan knew no bounds. They were even willing to attack officers of the law if they were black.
Yeah. An hour later, the driver of the pickup, Klansman Ernst Rayford McElveen of Bogalusa, was apprehended by police in Mississippi. Sheriff Crow charged him with the murder, but due to a lack of evidence, McElveen was never convicted. The FBI closed the investigation to the other Klansmen in 2016 after identifying 24 persons of interest through the years. So they don't really truly know who was in the pickup truck that night or who shot the officers.
And apparently, they weren't too keen on bringing these fellow racists to justice.
Of course they weren't. Why would they? And we are going to continue on with this episode after we take this quick break.
Let's see.
And we are back. Henry Austin and O'Neill Moore were good friends. On Fridays, Austin's insurance sales route took him by Moore's house. They had visited during his lunch breaks and watched television together. So, Henry Austin, member of the Deacon of Defense, was friends with one of the murdered officers. Or, I'm sorry, with the murdered officer.
Well, that's not terribly surprising, given their they seem to share the same mindset.
And probably the same age group, too.
Yeah.
John McKeithen was in his first term as Louisiana governor. He came out of the Caldwell Parish Hills as a segregationist candidate, but as a governor, he turned moderate. The murder of O'Neill Moore in Bogalusa and the potential for it to erupt in a racial powder keg was the biggest problem he faced. It's a big problem.
Yeah. High profile type of deal.
Yes, very high profile. 2 days before the deputies were shot, he had secretly met with Klansmen in an attempt to get them off the streets, telling reporters that he met with certain white people to try to prevent the kind of violence that had now happened. So he was secretly meeting with Klansmen to try to persuade them to not engage in violence. Pretty, I would say that's pretty heroic in a way.
Well, I don't think he had any reason to be afraid of him because he was their candidate. In actuality, he was their candidate for governor. You see.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't like let's say back then it wasn't like he was Al Sharpton
Right.
going to meet with the Klan. It's like not exactly the same kind of risk.
On July the 8th, the black community took to the Bogalusa streets to protest O'Neill Moore's murder. During the march, someone threw a rock, which hit Hattie Mae Hill, a 16-year-old black girl, in the back of the head. A mob of white men then blocked the path to the ambulance. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is.
Now, activist A.Z. Young was riding in the backseat of his 1964 Cadillac. Henry Austin and fellow deacon Milton Johnson, who was driving the car, noticed a nurse trying to help young Hattie Mae Hill. Milton Johnson moved forward so that Hill and the nurse could get into the car. Johnson then got out of the two-door car to help the nurse get the girl into the back seat. The mob swarmed Johnson, trapping him against the side of the vehicle. Henry Austin quickly exited the vehicle and fired a warning shot into the air with a pistol to try to help Johnson escape. I thought, the police would hear gunfire. But back then, I thought if they hear gunfire, they'd pay some attention. Well, they turned their back because they assumed, as usual, that it was the white people that had the guns. But they were wrong this time. The warning shot did not deter the mob. And by then, according to newspaper accounts, a white man identified as 26-year-old Alton Crow, not related to Sheriff Crow, of Pearl River, began pounding Johnson in his face with his fist. Henry Austin fired a second time, and this time the bullet hit the chest of Crow, who was a married father of 5. And this time, the police did notice. Of course they did.
Yeah.
They told Austin and Johnson to spread eagle, and they were arrested by Louisiana state troopers. Austin and Johnson were taken to jails in Covington and then New Orleans. Authorities feared that the Klan would try to break into the Bogalusa jail and kill them. While Austin sat in a jail cell, he watched the news. Alton Crow was interviewed in the hospital and said that he loved black people. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Henry Austin thought that they would electrocute him for shooting Alton Crow, which is pretty reasonable fear, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ultimately, Austin and Johnson were charged with aggravated battery, and the case was never brought to trial. Henry Austin was never prosecuted, presumably because the prosecutors viewed him as defending himself. Without having a weapon for self defense, Deacon Henry Austin and the others in that car would have been killed by the mob, and the incident exemplified why the deacons were needed and why they were armed.
Yes. Oh yeah. That was the only way to stand up to the Klan in that situation is use of force,
Yes.
deadly force.
And Hattie Mae Hill did survive, and she continued to do activist work. Decades after the incident, Alton Crow said that he believed he was doing what was right at the time, and he thought that Henry Austin felt the same way. We are in a different day and time now than we were back then, and I don't think the same way I thought back then, so things are a lot different now. The day Henry Austin shot Alton Crow was a turning point for Bogalusa. Henry Austin said that once they realized we were serious about shooting, it became basically a standoff between us and them. It was not like the old days where you could just drive in the neighborhood and everybody hid from you and you dragged whoever you wanted out. It was not like that anymore, and they realized that. When there's some opposition, it's not fun for them anymore.
Yeah, you ruin the bully's party when you stand up to them.
That is quite true. So the Henry Austin credits the success of the Bogalusa Deacons to its leader, Charles Sims. He said Sims was the only man in town who would take on the job. Sims was a goateed 42-year-old whose police record included 21 entries that dated back to 1956. Once, when Sims and other deacons were guarding court against a possible Klan attack, Sims approached Police Chief Claxon Knight, whose sympathetic view of the Klan is well documented in the FBI documents. And Sims told him, "You better stop them, because if you don't, we are going to kill them all." And after that, there was no more trouble. And according to the FBI documents, Sims later said that that night, a brand new Negro was born.
Yeah, just that one incidence of use of deadly force and self defense not only saved lives that day, but saved lives,
Future lives.
yeah, future lives afterwards because they got the message.
Yes. Top officials of the FBI and the Justice Department traveled down from Washington to witness some of the violence in Bogalusa. The Justice Department also filed lawsuits seeking to protect blacks, testing the new civil rights laws, and to halt Klan intimidation, and federal judges supported the effort. In late 1965, Robert Bob Hicks, a founder of the Bogalusa Deacons chapter and its original vice president, turned to the court system for help in the workplace, which opened up job opportunities and promotions that had been previously unobtainable for African Americans. The Deacons' efforts helped lead to an enforcement of new civil rights laws that ultimately resulted in blacks registering to vote in record numbers. They gained power in the political arena, and they now serve routinely in law enforcement all over Louisiana. We were effective, not heroic, effective, Henry Austin said. That's what we were. We came into existence when the situation demanded it. We went out of existence when we were no longer needed. The Deacon's tense confrontation with the Klan in Bogalusa was crucial in forcing the federal government to intervene on behalf of the local African American community. The national attention they garnered also persuaded state and national officials to initiate efforts to neutralize the Klan in the Deep South. And that is the story of the Deacons of Defense and how Henry Austin, one of the youngest members, managed to use violence as an effective tool against somebody who wanted to kill him and got away with it.
Yeah, constitutionally, he was exercising his Second Amendment rights.
Mm-hmm.
You see, and these incidents involving the Klan and Deacons of Defense and rogue members of law enforcement who supported the Klan is an example of resisting government tyranny using the Second Amendment.
That's a good point.
Yes. And this also further brings home the point that the Second Amendment is for everyone, regardless of your political beliefs.
Yes.
And there's no better use of the Second Amendment than someone who is an underdog, someone who is oppressed, for defending themselves.
Right. And we mean real oppression. We don't mean like fake oppression.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So,
racist police officers who were helping the Ku Klux Klan, that's government tyranny.
Yes.
Which does the actual government tyranny that has taken place in this country has not been talked about enough.
You're right. It has not been talked about enough. And these, little bits of history are so very important. It's important to talk about this.
Yes, because these are lessons that can be carried forward.
Yes. So, dear listeners, carry that lesson forward with you today or this week for the rest of your lives. That it is okay to defend yourself. If you're using it effectively, it is a tool.
Yes, it is okay to lawfully own guns.
Yes, lawfully is the key word here.
Yes. Regardless of your political beliefs, it's okay to own a gun as long as you obey the law. Respect other people.
Are those your final thoughts? Do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, those are my final thoughts, essentially. And what we also saw was the National Rifle Association, had assisted Deacons of Defense in obtaining firearms.
Right.
Which was the second time in the National Rifle Association's history that they were confronting the Ku Klux Klan. The first time was during the 1870s in Louisiana.
Huh.
When, at the time, President Ulysses S. Grant contacted a friend of his who he served with in the Civil War, who was, at the time, the president of the National Rifle Association, to raise a militia, come to Louisiana, and fight the Ku Klux Klan in Louisiana.
So today, our listeners got 2 history lessons for the price of 1.
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
Well, so the documentary on Deacons for Defense is on YouTube.
Okay. It is? All right.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
easily find it on YouTube. Yes.
Well, I will definitely link that in the show notes as well, because we should all look at it.
Yes, it's history that has been spoken of little.
Yes, very little, and there's not even a lot of information that I was able to find on the Deacons of Defense or Deacons for Defense, even on the internet through a pretty broad search too.
Yeah, they didn't get enough credit
No, they
for
really
what
did
they
not.
did. Just the same as these Black Korean War and World War II veterans didn't get enough credit for what they did. They were outstanding Americans who didn't get the respect they deserved. And when you deploy to a theater of operations in wartime service, no matter what you believe, no matter what race or creed you are, you deserve credit for that.
Yes. Yes. And, I also would like to add that this is the kind of thing that was this is one of the things that does make me proud of my state. This thing started in Louisiana. These people who lived in rural Louisiana in the 1960s, which was probably pretty terrible on many levels for everybody except for white men. Okay? Let's be real about that.
Yeah, that's where the saying "Are you white, you all right" originated.
Yeah. Okay, this started in Louisiana. These people were Louisianians. They had a lot of guts.
Yes, it does take a lot of guts to stand up to basically stand up to tyranny in the face of overwhelming opposition.
Yeah.
The willingness to take whatever comes to do what's right.
Yes. Well, dear listeners, that is it for us this week. Next week's episode will be dropped the day after Valentine's Day. So, we will bring you the story of Louisiana's most infamous couple, Bonnie and Clyde.
Yes, two of the most famous psychos from Louisiana.
Well, yes and no. We'll get into that though. So, dear listeners, until then, be safe, be kind. Remember that we're all human beings, and don't park next to vans.
If it's dark, it's dangerous, and it does not feel safe. Don't be there in the first place. And if you are talking to law enforcement in a professional capacity and you are not the victim or the witness to a crime, lawyer up.